Homicide of Claude and Roxanne Patino, statement given by Brian Flores in 2000 as follows. I'm a firm believer, or was a firm believer, of the divinity of the eternal light. They helped me when I was at my lowest point. They instilled structure back into my life. I had heard that it was a self-help group that provided you with guidance and enlightenment, and I needed that. I needed to lean on something because I was empty. Everything had been ripped out from under me and all I had was dirt. My friend Claude convinced me to go to a reunion, and I decided, what the hell, I'll go. And it changed me completely. It was as if I had finally seen the light, which was fitting because it's called the divinity of the eternal light. They were a close-knitted group that relied on each other, helped each other. We had weekend getaways where we would work on ourselves, and it was like a big therapy session where everyone unveiled their secrets. It was so liberating. I quit my job and started working as a recruiter for them. I would attend weekly meetings. We had daily prayers. We would meditate. I met the leaders when I had recruited over 100 people. They commemorated me on my great work. They were so inspiring. They made me feel so good about myself. I started meeting weekly with them, and it got to the point that I would do anything for them. The leaders and this place were the most important things in my life. Gradually, my income started to get better. The more recruits I got, the more I would get paid. I sold my house and moved closer to the temple, in a little house in the outskirts of town. The rent was so much cheaper, and I didn't need much. I was able to visit our temple as many times as I wanted. People would travel far to come to it, which is one of the major reasons why I wanted to move closer, so I could visit it always, and so I could be close to our leaders. I could see them every day now, and I worshipped the ground they stood on. They were my family. The divinity of the eternal light was my true family. A few years passed, and I was in bliss. I had recruited so many people, and they would thank me. I would see how happy they now were. They were so miserable when I first met them. I felt like I had a true purpose in life. I worked in data processing before. It was mindless work, and I never once felt the gratification that I felt with the divinity of the eternal light. I remember I converted these group of women who had suffered abuse, and with the help of our family, we gave them the support they needed to leave their abusers, and they were reverent members ever since. They moved to the main quarters in the temple, and I would run into them every time I went for prayers or during meetings. Some of the women had married within the members. There were two in particular who were best friends. Their names were Rose and Edna. They had met each other when they were paired together in the living quarters in the temple. They had married brothers who were also friends of mine. Carl and Tim had been members since before I was. They helped me in the beginning when I was just starting to believe. I was happy for Rose and Edna because I knew they had gotten good guys. I saw Rose and Edna one day. I hadn't seen them in a while because I would travel to get new recruits. They were both pregnant, pretty far along. I remember their wide smiles and the brimming happiness in their eyes. They told me they always wanted to be mothers, and I knew they would be good ones, and I told them so. I remember telling them that I couldn't wait to see their children running around the temple, because that was what we needed, children. There was none in the temple, and we needed that happiness here of children playing and laughing. I wanted to hear it. We were missing that. Rose and Edna had agreed. They wanted to see if they could convince the leaders to have a playground built next to the temple. A few weeks later, I left for another tour across the United States to get more recruits. I was gone for a few months. When I came back, I saw that Rose and Edna weren't pregnant anymore. I asked them separately because I ran into both of them at separate times, and what they said still scares me. Rose's eyes were glassy and emotionless. She said that the baby she had was not hers. It was for the divinity of the eternal light, that the leaders had told her that this baby was theirs, and the next one would be hers. One for them, one for her. I asked her which of the leaders because I could not believe Master Tona and Master Riel would say that. And Rose said all of them. All of the leaders agreed. And then she smiled at me and said, This one is for them, and I am proud to be of service. The next one will be for me." And she was so serious about it, as if the request had not been outlandish. I couldn't believe it. I went searching for Edna after, and she said the same thing as Rose, without one hint of regret in her voice. Edna was proud that she was able to serve her leader since they had done so much for her family. I felt crazy. I searched for Carl and Tim. They were the fathers. Surely they would not have agreed to this. I found them in the temple praying. I didn't want to disturb their prayers. They're an important part of our life. And even though I felt myself becoming disillusioned, I could not completely lose my faith. I waited for them to finish. They were friendly as ever, asked me how my tour was, until I couldn't take the small talk anymore and demanded to know if what Rose and Edna said was correct. They were shocked by my outburst and said, "Of course it's true." They said, and by the divinity did they look proud, "We have served Master Tona, Riel, and Rupert greatly. We are highly regarded to them. We are above all others." And I can't describe it, but I could see how their eyes glowed, and something in me could almost understand them, because I wanted nothing more than for Master Tona and Riel to love me as I loved them. I would get anything for them to love me. At least, that is what I thought, until I saw that what I would have to give was something too great. A child. My child. I didn't think I could ever do that. I'm ashamed that the first thought that crossed my mind in that second was fear, that I would make the masters upset with me if I could not grant them my child. I felt bile rise up my throat when I realized that I was scared of losing the master's love, and not whatever sick thing they were doing with the children. I walked away from them. I couldn't stand to see their proud faces anymore. I went to my home and didn't leave for several days, and I just thought to myself, what was I going to do? I didn't want to leave the divinity of the eternal light. Even with this revelation, I loved the masters and I loved this new family that I had. I didn't want to betray them. And for a time, I didn't. I went back like if nothing had happened. Did my daily routine. Went to the temple for prayers, meeting, or feasts. I went back to ignorance and I was happy again. Until I would catch a glimpse of Edna and Rose and I would feel sick. And then I started noticing a lot of women around me were pregnant, deeply pregnant, and months passed and then they weren't pregnant anymore. But there was never any children in the temple. Why were there pregnant women but never any children? Months went by and I couldn't take it anymore. The guilt was consuming me. I confronted Master Tona and Riel. They would eat breakfast with us always, and I asked them after if I could have a word with them. I asked them about the pregnant woman. Why were they keeping the children? What was the purpose? Master Tona, he smiled at me and said they were the future, our future, and the children were being sent to the great temple. We weren't allowed in the great temple, only what we called the special ones were. Master Tona said that they were going to be raised to be the new leaders, and they would get everything they wanted. They would be able to unleash their fullest potential. I don't know. When Master Tona explained it to me, it made so much sense. I couldn't doubt Master Tona, and Master Riel was there too, nodding along, and I couldn't not believe them. More time passed, and I was happy again, recruiting. And then I started to notice how the women who I had seen pregnant before were pregnant again. They were my friends, my family. They had all told me, one for the divinity and one for them. But when they had their baby, it was not for them. There were never any children in the temple. I didn't realize how strange that was until I realized that I had been here for 5 years and there was never any children in the temple. I knew then that I had to leave. As hard as it was for me, I needed to go, but I didn't know where. It was then that I remembered my old friend Claude, who had introduced me to the divinity. He wasn't here long, had abandoned the divinity 2 years after I had joined. I disassociated myself from him, didn't want anything to do with him when he left. He was the only person I could think of. I had no friends that were not my family from the Divinity of the Eternal Light. I had stopped communicating with all of them when I joined. I had no one, but at least Claude might be able to understand me, might be able to help me even though we had not spoken in years. He had tried to contact me when he left, but I ignored him. I was nervous because I didn't know if he had changed his number. I was lucky. He hadn't. He could hardly believe that I was calling him, and I told him everything I'm telling you now. And he believed me. He told me the reason why he left. Claude, he and his wife were both part of the Divinity, but they didn't move close to the temple like I did, so they'd only come once a week. His wife had gotten pregnant. I remember. He left the Divinity around the time the baby should have been born, so I never got to see the baby. I didn't even know what he had. Anyways, he told me over the phone how he and his wife were anxiously awaiting the baby and how the masters were keenly interested in the progress of his wife's pregnancy. At the time, he felt honored that they were getting so much attention. When the time came for his wife to give birth, the master told him to wait outside. And he did, because it was the masters, and you did what they told you. When the masters finally came to get him, they told him that the baby had died, and he felt as if a knife had buried itself in his gut. He cried and asked the masters if he could see his baby, if he could hold him and kiss him goodbye. And they told him no, that it would affect his inner light if he saw his dead child. Claude told me that for the first time he felt hatred towards the masters. He yelled at them, told them they could not stop him from seeing his baby, from saying goodbye. They tried to calm him down, but nothing was going to get him to calm down. He was a madman. He had to be escorted out, and he cried and banged at the doors in anger, but no one would open. The next day he saw his wife, pale and depressed on her bed. She was just as upset as Claude, but she had no strength to argue the night before. That was when she told him something. She said she wasn't sure, because she was so exhausted and in pain. But she heard the baby cry, before it was ushered away, after she was told that it was born dead, that it never cried. But she heard it, she was sure. Claude told me crying with the grief of 1,000 men. He said he went to the police with his wife, and no one would come to investigate because they had given the Divinity the right to act like their hospital, and their records show that the baby was born dead. They even had a death certificate. I couldn't believe it, but he said that now that I had uncovered this, it all made sense. And it did. For some reason, the Divinity was taking the children, and we didn't know why. Claude and I came up with a plan. I would hide a recorder in my clothing and ask the masters again over the children so I could have proof that they're taking babies. And that way the main temple could be investigated. And I did it. I felt like I was betraying Master Tona and Master Rio, but I did it, and it is here in my pocket, along with this declaration I am giving. Claude should be here soon. He will tell you. Claude and his wife will be here soon. End of statement by Brian Flores. The statement was taken by police officer Lincoln Treaker, and he wrote some very interesting notes. Brian Flores voluntarily walked into the police precinct. There had been a manhunt for him before his arrival that lasted 6 hours when a tip was called in by a neighbor that gunfire was heard in his house. Upon arrival, police found the dead bodies of Claude and Roxanne Patino, who were each shot in the head execution style. In the days leading up to this double murder, there had been many tips called into the police that state that Brian Flores had been acting erratically and should undergo physiological evaluation before he became a threat to himself or someone else. It seems their concerns were valid. Unfortunately, we were unable to respond due to low manpower. Brian Flores did turn over a tape recorder which was packed up along with his belongings. The gun was not found on the scene. However, Brian Flores had no alibi for the past 6 hours, and neighbors say that only Brian, Claude, and Roxanne were seen entering Brian Flores' house. End of notes by police officer Lincoln Treaker. The Divinity of the Eternal Light. That call has been getting pretty big these last few years. with new temples popping up in almost every country. I didn't realize they had been active since before the 2000s. If Brian Flores was unstable, then this statement should be disregarded. Although, I will not put it past the divinity of the eternal light to be taking babies. Unfortunately, there's no proof to the statement. The tape recorder was later listed as missing, which is a shame. I would have wanted to hear if Brian Flores really did get a confession from one of the masters. I would like nothing more than to have a formal investigation done on the divinity of the eternal light, but those guys are untouchable. I'll file this case under resolved. End of Case 5.
Forgotten Creatures, a weekly horror podcast by Dark Nymph Productions, available on all podcast providers. For more information, follow us on Instagram at Forgotten Creatures Podcast.